Good evening. I chose to conduct my SRP on the various interpretations of Vigor in the hand-washing process among individuals. My name is Haylee Hines. I attend Tunstall High School, and I plan to attend the University of Virginia in pursuit of a degree in cognitive behaviors and neuroscience. I chose my study because I have had one great curiosity for my entire life. That curiosity has stemmed from the questions of why is everyone so different? Why does everyone complete the exact same tasks different ways? And what affects our behavior to complete the task in these ways? Of course, I aim to answer these questions in my future research and hopefully future career, but I thought it would be fitting to get a small insight into the research I will be conducting in the future. To begin, I first had to turn to the literature. Because I chose the common process of hand washing, there was already an ample amount of research already conducted within the field. Studies show that the general time that is most efficient for hand washing is 25 seconds, because anything under this will not reduce as much bacteria as it could be, and anything over 25 seconds will decrease the average person's productive efficiency in their task. Another big question that was answered in my literature is that the use of soap is vital for decontamination, and antibacterial soap is effective, accessible, and hypoallergenic. Contamination is a big aspect of study in this field as well, because for generations, researchers have been looking for ways to combat contamination. My research showed no true way to decrease the risk of contamination, since it comes from the simplest of things, like touching door handles, tying your shoes, and scratching your face. However, my research showed that the use of hand washing methods with soap, water, and scrubbing, if paired with proactive efficiency, have potential to decrease contamination. Once establishing the common process that former researchers had decided upon, I then redirected my research to focus on what these studies found and how these apply to my own study. The spread of infection is what is used to encourage people to wash their hands. And infections caused by bacteria and viruses have been proven to be reduced with the practice of hand hygiene. Something that has been influential in how a person develops their hand washing process could be shown by whether or not they have various viruses or infections as a child. Bacteria evolves, as with every other organism. Research shows that bacteria has grown to withstand replacements for the hand washing process, such as alcohol-based sanitizers. Therefore, hand washing still proves to be the best practice for hand hygiene and decontamination, which has influenced overall efficiency among individuals. But for a common process, such as hand washing, it can be easily overlooked and taken for granted. The studies in my literature review showed well-written and specific limitations and calls for further research that are important for my own study. Most of these include population-based limitations, such as occupation, age, gender, and geographical background, all of which affect how an individual conducts their individual behaviors. This finding has led to the subfield within the field of hand washing. Psychological studies have become a focus, since, as stated earlier, hand washing has already been thoroughly researched. These new studies include hygiene interventions that researchers have shown to be somewhat effective in getting the population to wash their hands more frequently with a more proactive approach. In regards to this, multiple other compliance studies aim to prove just how many people actually wash their hands as many times as they should, or as many times as they claim to do. My literature showed that a big part of adoptive behavior, including habits, is elementary education, and how hand washing was emphasized to kids as their brains were still developing. All of these things comes down to a limitation that can be placed in any research that is conducted on human behavior. That is personal interpretation, and how this affects efficiency in daily and habitual tasks. After reading all of this literature, I had a genuine question that I was able to remodel into my research question. That is, how does the interpretation of Vigor in the hand washing process vary among individuals? I hypothesized that if individuals were asked to wash their hands as they normally would, their interpretation would grow similar amounts of bacteria as if they were asked to wash their hands gently or with little vigor. Combating this, my null hypothesis stated that if individuals are asked to apply different levels of vigor to the hand washing process, the outcome would have no difference in bacteria growth. In asking this question and hypothesizing the results, I knew exactly what my variables would be. The independent variable is the instruction that the participants would receive. The dependent variable is the amount of bacteria that grew on the hands. The control variable is the instruction of wash your hands as you normally would, or having my participants complete their hand washing process individually. My constants were all of my materials, the location of my setting, and the time each participant was given to complete their process. To begin my experiment, I first obtained consent from all my participants. After this, I gathered the materials necessary to perform my experiment. This consisted of antibacterial soap, paper towels, and of course water, which I took several samples of in order to gauge an average water temperature that resulted in about 35 degrees Celsius. My sample of 15 participants was taken from Gov School and AET students as a convenience sample. I applied my study of the sample over the course of 3 days. On day 1, participants were asked to wash their hands as they normally would. On day 2, they were asked to wash their hands gently, and on day 3, participants were asked to wash their hands vigorously. On each day, bacteria was collected by asking participants to apply gentle pressure directly to a petri dish. These petri dishes were then placed in the incubator, set at 37 degrees Celsius for 24 hours. After this, I compiled my raw data and conducted my statistical analysis. To complete my statistical analysis, I had to compare each participant's difference in their normal and vigorous methods to their normal and gentle methods, using a paired samples t-test, since the same sample was used for each variable. My aim was to show that the difference between normal and vigorous would be greater than the difference between normal and gentle, showing that a participant's normal method would be way closer to their gentle method of instruction. My test found at a significance level of 0.05 that the null hypothesis was rejected with a p-value of 0.048. As seen in the graph above, variance is present among all the individuals in my research. All of my participants had a normal method that fell somewhere in between the gentle and vigorous instructions. Although some participants had normal methods closer to their vigorous methods, the majority of my population suggested that my hypothesis was correct in assuming that the normal method would be closer to the gentle method. My data shows a presence of human variance within my particular sample. This shows that within human interpretation, there is room to grow in the hand washing process. This opens up more opportunities for research in habitual efficiency and how to reverse these habits we've developed. It can be concluded that any use of vigor is beneficial for the reduction of bacteria. However, it is also shown that some people behave more effectively than others in their hygienic processes. Varying factors may influence how these people choose to wash their hands, but it can be said that there is a difference between instructed processes and habitual processes, as instructed processes proactively increased or decreased the amount of bacteria that was left on my participants' hands. That doesn't necessarily mean that this can be true for all habitual processes, as I only tested hand washing. Therefore, in conclusion, I concluded at 0.05 significance level that there is sufficient evidence to suggest that the average adolescent washes their hands with about as much vigor as they would if they were instructed to wash their hands gently or with little vigor. In my data collection, there were significant details of my data that need to be addressed. While counting bacteria, I saw large colonies that covered the entire petri dish, which affected my data and my ability to count all the colonies, as well as very large amounts of bacteria and very small amounts of bacteria, which created outliers in my research. This also created large standard deviations and large statistical means. From my study, I answered a lot of my own questions, but the true importance has more to do with what changes can be made. The use of vigor in my study, like many others, has proven that any use of vigor improves bacteria elimination in the hand washing process. However, my initial aim of proving that certain aspects of the population impact their habitual behaviors was not completely addressed. This includes my literature review findings of how we developed in early education and how these processes were taught to individuals. So this implies that my original gap still needs research, but my personal study showed that this research is important, as well as the need to reverse these habits, if not just to learn more about them because they are real and impact the lives of many individuals, including their health status. The limitations of my studies stem from the same reason that I initially developed my research question. I wanted to know why most of these studies in my literature produced limitations of participant interpretation. This was developed further in my study, but my research did not discover why these interpretations were present in individuals. Another limitation is the bacteria application I chose to use, as several studies in my literature review collected bacteria by having participants directly apply their washed hands to a petri dish. All participants were asked to apply gentle amounts of pressure to the petri dish, but they may have had different interpretations of what this was. I tried my best to combat this by using the paired samples t-test, so the pressure would remain constant as long as the individual's data was taken as a difference. Of course, I did not have access to a large population, and this would have allowed me to push my research and develop a conclusion that would be more suitable for the gap in my field. My limitations led me to believe that there are many calls for further research. Researchers should look into ways to change these behaviors, or find exactly why these behaviors can vary so much. Of course, other studies could do similar methodologies with larger or more varying sample sizes. This would show what variances among the population impact behavior. Different approaches could also be used to establish whether habitual behaviors impact other activities and processes, or only hygienic processes like hand washing. I knew I would have to give a lot to this research, but the good thing about giving is that there's always take. I have taken a source of inspiration away from my study, and I now know that my curiosities have potential to be beneficial to myself and others. I will continue my research, if for nothing else, but to find a way to reverse the germophobia that I've developed from completing my experiment and counting thousands of bacteria colonies. I've also taken a few personal habits, as not every time I see a sink, I have to wash my hands because I'm afraid of what's on them. I would like to say thank you to Ms. Long for making this process possible and helping me establish confidence in my research. I'd also like to say thank you to Dr. Bocock for allowing my study to take place, and especially to my participants for taking the time to take part in my study. Thank you for listening. I will now be taking any questions. Yes, Mr. Quintero.
How did the past studies limit lurking variables such as varying levels of operant conditioning?
Could you repeat your question?
How did past studies limit lurking variables such as varying levels of operant conditioning? Did they measure by a survey of how their parents treated them? Like if they didn't wash their hands?
Right. Mr. Quintero is asking how my studies and my literature review measured, I'm guessing, how they learned their behavior. Is that what I had one study in particular that focused on elementary education. They compared the use of an app to the use of a book in teaching hand washing to kindergartners. This study was what I made my study off of because it really intrigued me. But it was mostly how they measured it was how much more compliance had grown within the kindergartners instead of what they actually did. Mr. Hare?
So I noticed in one of the pictures you had two gentlemen. Unfortunately, my son was in one of those. So hopefully we're giving Ms. Long a hard time. But did those participants wash their hands individually in the sink, or did you allow them to wash their hands together in the sink? And did that change outcome?
Mr. Hare is asking about my methodology and how my participants were able to wash their hands. Unfortunately, I was very rushed because I couldn't keep any of my participants after the time they needed to be on the bus. I did have them line up. They weren't supposed to wash their hands at the same time. I don't think any of them did. I hope they didn't. But they washed their hands one at a time, and they all did help me, like just make sure that I got the right names and the right petri dishes, and it was really a group effort.
Thank you.
The picture he's talking about is the methodology, and even I think if you look at that picture, you'll be able to tell him what was actually happening.
What's actually happening in that picture is that Zachary Payne, as seen in the picture, was complaining that his hands were burning because we had to use the lab sinks. They don't really have temperature gauges. That's why I have to take the average temperatures.
Jackson was using the tube, so it's accurate.
Thank you.
Do you think the age of the children who come through COVID, do you think that will make a difference in their hand washing, the feeling that they need to wash their hands? Let's say the younger children, say 3, 4, 5, and 6, versus older children your age in their life. Do you think this will impact them?
Dr. Jones is asking about the effect of COVID on the generational individual habits. And I do believe that this could make a difference, but I don't think that it will make a difference for younger generations, like the people who were gonna grow up when they were 5 at the time. Maybe, I think definitely myself, but older generations who saw what happened and saw like how they didn't get to go to school definitely affected them, because I don't want it to happen again, so I might wash my hands a little bit more. Ms. Walls.
So in your experiment, you had three different groups, and the one that you had, the Vigor group, what was your definition of vigor? What did you instruct the participants to do to increase vigor?
Ms. Walls is asking about the instructions that I gave to my vigorous group. I did simulate each method as well a couple of times, and when I got a few questions about what that meant, and that's why I placed my order, day 1, day 2, day 3, because I wanted my participants to have no knowledge of what my experiment would be. And their first method, I wanted to be normal. Their second method, I wanted to be gentle, so that wherever they started, they would get harder from there. So, because I kind of modeled that off of some methodologies that I had in my literature review.
So I want more of a definition of vigor. Does that mean increased speed, or complexity of the washing, or like what was your definition of how vigorous was the wash?
Ms. Walls is asking about my definition of vigorous, and I think I just meant forcefully.
Okay.
Ms. Frost.
So they were their own controls, or they were not?
Did you
All, were the students their own controls? Did they participate in all 3 of the categories?
Ms. Frost is asking about all my participants, and yes,
They were,
they
okay.
participated in every single one of my variables.
And just to follow up, you said that in your literature you found that they used their hand to press on the agar plate. Do you know why they did that?
Ms. Frost is asking about why I used them putting their hand directly on the agar plate. I found that incredibly weird, because usually you would see the use of a Q-tip or something similar to that, but I had maybe 4 or 5 studies use directly to the petri dish, and only 1 study used a Q-tip, and I have no idea why.
Okay, I was just curious that chemistry is more my thing than biology, but I was just thinking it would disrupt the agar and it wouldn't grow properly, but just curiosity, thank you.
Mr. Shaw.
Did you come across any studies concerning Vigor and hand sanitizer? If so, what did they conclude?
Mr. Shaw is asking about any studies I came across using Vigor with the addition of hand sanitizer. One of my studies did do that exact thing with doctors using hand sanitizer and how this decreased the bacteria on their hands. And they did use hand sanitizer as if they were washing their hands, just not using soap or water, only hand sanitizer. And it lasted, and it got rid of more bacteria, but it lasted less than if the doctor was to just wash their hands normally with soap and water.